So before we get started, I also wanted to go ahead, Dav, as you know, I do have children. I have a 9-year-old, and because this is my home office, she may pop in. I make it a point not to police Black bodies, especially not the ones that are in my care or in my home. So I just want to go ahead and thank my internet cousins out there for your patience and understanding and thoughtfulness if she were to pop in, and we'll just continue. She probably just wants to say hello. We would just continue with the presentation. So thank you in advance for this opportunity. Davlet.
We are now going to take a moment because we're going to discuss things about being a strong Black woman that could potentially maybe cause people to not be able to be present. So we'd like to do something called grounding and intention. And the grounding we're going to do is to focus on our breath and our body and in that kind of awareness. Excuse me. And then intention setting is just kind of a focus for how we're going to proceed through the next part of this presentation, how you want to proceed. So if you don't mind closing your eyes, and if you're not in a place where you can do that, just kind of gaze softly in the room where you are. And we're going to take a few breaths together. And when you take your breath, you're going to breathe deeply into your stomach. And you should feel it rise as you take your breath in. And then when you exhale, you're going to exhale through pursed lips. And you're going to breathe all the way until you have to take another intake breath. And we're going to do 3 of those together. And while you do that, I just want you to focus on the breath, nothing else. So try as you might. I know the first time I tried to do this, my mind wandered in all kind of 50 directions, and that's okay because you're not trying perfection. We're just gonna come back to the breath, come back to the breath, come back to the breath, okay? So we're gonna do that together. 1, 2, 3, inhale. Hold your breath. Exhale. You're just gonna make sure your feet are on the floor and everything's uncrossed and you're sitting up so your back is kind of tall like a mountain. We're gonna take the next breath. 1, 2, 3, inhale. Hold your breath. Exhale. And on this last breath, I want you to think about what you need to lay down to be able to really enter into the presentation, and then what you would like to get out of the presentation. So what do you need to lay down so you can really focus, and then what is it you'd like to get out of the presentation? We're gonna take our last breath as we ponder this. 1, 2, 3, inhale. Hold your breath. And exhale. All right, and hopefully you have a pen by you, or you can obviously use your computer and just write what you're laying down and then what you would like to get out of the presentation kind of somewhere near you so that you can keep coming back to that as we are focusing on, excuse me, the strong Black woman. So just kind of write those down, and as your mind may wander, just keep coming back to those things.
Dav, did you want them to put that in the chat as well, or no?
No, not for this.
Okay.
Time. Just gonna, I'll just sing the Jeopardy song for a little bit for them to write that down. So I'm singing it in my head, not out loud. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dav. And now that we've started with the grounding and intention, which is really a way for us to be very intentional about this space that we're creating together, we'd like to go ahead and move into the next slide, which is going to talk about the community agreements that we like to set to help us with this container, this space that we're in today. So we'd like for you to agree to be present. And that's not just physically, but also mentally in this space with us. We ask that you continue to be kind and afford kindness to not just us, the facilitators, but to yourself in this process. We also ask that you be open to what it is that you've heard thus far and what it is that we're going to share with you. We try to utilize equitable space and communication, meaning not to overtalk other people and leaving room for others as well. And we usually do that when we're doing trainings, facilitating trainings or workshops. We also want you to be authentic, just be transparent with yourself and what your individual experience is. And we also ask that you be brave. Brave to be your authentic self in this space with us. What you'll notice is we do not have the term perfect here because we don't believe such thing exists. We really think it's important for us to be able to strive to be our best, and we strive for excellence, but we do not strive to be right or perfect. And so we ask that you do the same for yourself in this process with us. So thank you. So we're going to go ahead, now that we've set our container for today's presentation, we want to go ahead to the next slide and talk about our objectives.
So we have 4 objectives for our presentation today. And as you look through these and think, wow, that's a lot. How are we going to get through all of that in this presentation? Well, this is a brief exploration into these ideas, and hopefully that will encourage you to continue to learn more on your own or seek out additional opportunities to learn about what it means to live by the strong Black woman and the advantages and disadvantages to that. So the first thing we want to do is to provide a working framework for the strong Black woman. And then we're going to do a brief, very brief exploration of historical context of the strong Black woman. This context, you know, for us starts with enslavement. And so that's a long period of time to provide historical context. So literally it'll be brief. The third thing we're going to do is explore the mental and emotional advantages and disadvantages to Black women in society that comes from just the expectations that you can live by or live through the strong Black woman stereotype. And then briefly, we're going to explore ways that we can live more congruent, authentic, whole lives. And so those are our objectives, and we're going to do a personal inventory.
Yes, so if you would please take a moment and write down your initial reaction to the term, the strong Black woman. We want you to think about these terms in relation to the following: in relation to personal relationships you have with friends or family members, inter-office work relationships that you may have, and then also personal relationship you have with yourself. So specifically, what comes to your mind, or what do you feel when you hear or read the terms strong Black woman? So I'm going to go ahead and give you 2 minutes to think about that and write that down, please. Okay, I see some of you have written down your thoughts in the Q&A, and so I'll read some. William Daniel shared, I think about the lack of importance of Black male in the life of the Black woman when you hear the strong Black woman stereotype. Aliyah Muhammad stated, things that come to her mind is never showing weakness, being present in all things. Sheila Pittman stated, oh, that was a thank you, okay. And then another comment was heavy expectations of Black women. Okay. Thank you very much for sharing some of the initial reactions that you had when you hear the term the strong Black woman, or you read the terms the strong Black woman. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so the framework we'd like to share with you comes from the work of Dr. Cheryl Giscombe, who's a psychiatric nurse and psychologist practitioner. And she developed the 5 characteristics of the Black superwoman persona syndrome. And in her framework, she shares there's this perceived obligation to present an image of strength. With the strong Black woman or the Black superwoman persona. It's perceived obligation to suppress emotions, resistance to vulnerability, or dependence on help from others. There's this motivation to succeed despite limited resources. There's a prioritization of caregiving or giving of care to others in contrast to balancing that with their own self-care. And we also noticed that the strong Black woman sexually satisfies her man. There's this notion that she's going to sexually satisfy her man. And the assumption is that she is also heterosexual. And that's something that Dr. Harris spoke to earlier in her part of the presentation, that the strong Black woman is believed to be, cannot be a lesbian, but is believed to be heterosexual. So you can just take a moment and just think about how that can impact what the psychological as well as emotional impact there may be for someone who's having to lean into the strong Black woman stereotype or the expectations that are set forth if you have to lean into the strong Black woman stereotype.
Dr. Melissa Harris Perry is a Black woman, activist, journalist. I became familiar with her through her work on MSNBC, through her show. And she says that the strong Black woman is only celebrated when she is in service to others. So it's only important what you do when you're doing it for the service of others, so you can be celebrated in that way. Black women are praised, validated, and admired based on how we behave and not for who we are. That says a lot about some of the framework we were looking at earlier, that they have a strong kind of moral compass, and that's related to, not doing the things that specifically Christianity would say that you couldn't do. And so the Black woman wasn't allowed to, the strong Black woman, at least that stereotype, allowed to live out based on kind of who they want to be or who they are, but how society says you need to be. And so there's a loss of social standing is an ever-present threat for individuals whose social acceptance is based on behavioral traits than unconditional human value. So living with that kind of pressure for the strong Black woman, we're going to talk about, there's advantages and disadvantages to that.
Thank you, Davlin. So we want to take a moment, and like we said earlier, that this is going to be really a crash course because this is not enough time to delve into over 400 years of history. But when we take when we look at it historically, the terminology of the strong Black woman, we need to recognize that we Black women were strong before the stereotype even existed. We take into consideration enslavement. During the enslavement process, we were separated from families, right? So we had to be, strong in the sense to be able to maintain, even in the midst of being separated from loved ones, being separated from our homeland and being brought the Middle Passage, just knowing, just the transatlantic passage, how that was to be able to survive that. We also know we endured and had to deal with sharecropping. And this is where, a lot of times men were on the run a lot for fear of being arrested, lynched, killed, and murdered. So they too had to leave their family, not because they necessarily wanted to, but it was for safety purposes. And then just dealing with the Jim Crow, era Jim Crow. And still dealing with that today, according to Dr. Michelle Alexander, the new Jim Crow is the prison industrial complex, right? The school to prison pipeline. So we're still having to deal with that in modern day, contemporary times. So the term came into widespread usage in the 70s as a means of debunking the other stereotypes often placed on Black women. So we have the mammy figure, you have the Jezebel, you have the sapphire, which has since transitioned to the angry Black woman. So that's just a brief look at the historical context. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about potential advantages, right, to the stereotype of the strong Black woman. So the strong Black woman stereotype really challenges the belief that Black women don't matter, right? We see that because of how instrumental Black women have been in social movements, but in the benefit of their own children, the benefit of just the society as a whole. It has also enabled us to survive the cruelty of slavery and continued racism that we experience today. It extended family relationships. So a big piece that helped the Black community is what we know as fictive kinship. You hear that that's my play cousin. We hear these type of things, but they didn't just come out of nowhere. It didn't just happen on the schoolyard. That was essential during the times of enslavement, where we were separated from our tribes, separated from our family members. And so it wasn't uncommon for people to bring in other people as their kin because they were Black, and experiencing the same traumas of racism and white supremacy. And the strong Black woman stereotype also provided hope for future generations. So I like to say that I am an ascendant of warriors. I'm an ascendant of kings and queens. And yes, they were kings and queens, but there were also warriors that were brought over here. And we know this specifically with the Haitian Revolution. We know for a fact that it was a strong woman, a smart woman who was part of the warriors in her tribe in Africa that was brought over enslavement and helped Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture in being strategic in overthrowing, the French in Haiti, and then becoming, the first Black republic in the Western Hemisphere. So the strong Black woman stereotype does have its advantages as well.
Yeah, Dominique, I was just thinking as you were talking that some of those advantages that you listed are direct ways to combat some of these negative things that people go through. So as we know, Black women are undertreated and underdiagnosed for depression and anxiety, and yet being a strong Black woman or living that stereotype gives a sort of hope, because there's always hope. If my ancestors survived this, I can too. I'm a strong Black woman. Or like you were saying, excuse me, sorry, my throat is so dry, so sorry about the constant throat clearing. But when you were also talking about families and kinship, that is a way to stop isolation, which comes about because of depression. So I'm so depressed. Oh, we haven't seen you in a long time. Where have you been? Your fictive kinship will come after you. And so they will come to find you if you were. So that, I think those are, big ways to kind of support, even though there's some disadvantages to the strong Black woman stereotype. We want to use Maslow's hierarchy of needs because this is kind of the framework that a lot of people use for how we move through life and become this like whole person, live congruent lives. And if you can't, like on the bottom, you kind of move up. So you can't meet your physiological needs, like for food and shelter. You can't take those things. How are we moving towards wholeness? Right? I gotta worry about my family. I gotta worry about food. I can't worry about living this whole life that you're talking about. And so, excuse me, I think sometimes we don't think about how racism also can affect this. So you're the strong Black woman, and the racism that you see every day, or the murder of Black people, that directly impacts the need for safety and security. And so how am I living without anxiety if I'm constantly afraid for my family or for myself? And then I can't mention those things because being emotionally vulnerable is not seen as strong. And so those can be some heavy disadvantages walking through life in anxiety. It's really hard to live a whole life, a congruent life, if we are living in constant state of hypervigilance because we're nervous that something else is going to happen. And so I think when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, theoretically it will move up. Oh, cool, I got a job now, I'm done. Move up. Safety, security. Okay, I'm safe and secure. Awesome, move up. And I think that's typically maybe for whiteness when they don't have to think about these things being Black, and the way that we process through is more of a cyclical nature through this hierarchy of needs. It's kind of coming back over and over and trying to live a life of wholeness when you're constantly kind of having assault on each of these levels. So one thing we want to do is to be able to live congruent, authentic, whole lives. That's the goal we believe with for Dream Sealing Services. And so acknowledging that may not be everybody's goal. So, but if this is your goal, as it is ours, these are some things that as Black women and as people in general, some things to think about. So not taking admirable qualities to the extreme. For example, the ride or die. It's like, no, I'm going to ride with you and I'm going to be loyal, but I'm also going to take care of myself. And so I'm not going to take that loyalty to the extreme. So you want to expand your definition of lens to include kind of all the things. So what does it mean to be strong? What does it mean to be loyal? What does it mean to be loving? And having a whole picture of self versus having one characteristic be the thing that you're going to focus on. The second thing is self-awareness about how you are living out of the stereotype. Okay, well, I'm going to examine my days and look at them and say, okay, how am I doing at being the person I want to be? How can I be congruent? Am I saying strong Black woman with my head, but in my heart, I'm having all of these struggles with depression and anxiety? Do I need to seek help? Because that's more of a, okay, I don't want to live out of that stereotype anymore. I want to be vulnerable. I want to have emotional integrity. And so being self-aware is hugely important. The next thing, like I said, is getting help. Therapy, medical, nutritional, relational, all the things to challenge the ways you live out of the stereotype. For example, medical, it's really hard to seek medical care for a lot of Black people, Black women, due to the history of the medical industrial complex. Lots of experimentation, not believing Black women when they say they're in pain or something's going on, believing that Black women can endure all the things and not have any problem because we've endured all the things in the past. And so you have to get help. You have to get help to move past some of that and to move into trusting somewhat, but also being, you also have to have some degree of suspicion because this country is not exactly being equitable towards Black people, Black women, Black men, Black family. And so the last thing, if you're not Black, what expectations do you have about Black women, specifically as it comes to the strong Black woman stereotype? Be willing to reflect on your privilege with an eye towards growth, not guilt. So especially sometimes in the work environment, the Black woman will be the spokesman because she's the strong Black woman. She can go to that office, tell them what's going on, and will suffer the repercussions while other people who brought those concerns do not have to face those. And so I think that's a way to look in and say, okay, how am I expecting this Black woman to act out of this stereotype, and how can I not do that? And really receive people for who they are. Dr. Reader, you have to unmute yourself.
Black woman steps up to mic. Black woman has a poem gestating deep inside her belly, can feel the painful pulse of contraction, her mouth fully dilated, but Black woman is afraid to push the poem from her lips for fear that the crowd will call her poem ugly, its cries unworthy of being heard, or even worse, they will try to kill it. Because see, Black woman has become accustomed to having her babies slaughtered. Black woman is accustomed to the same kind of death herself. Black woman feels like she should change her name from mother to martyr. Black woman is even afraid to call herself Black woman too many times in this poem because she has been taught that she is too insignificant to be acknowledged. Black woman steps up to mic. But before she can even speak a word, she already hears the crowd's thoughts. Shut up, bitch. Nobody wants to hear another one of your Black woman poems. Besides, nobody can hear your dog whistle of a voice besides other Black bitches. Black woman steps up to mic. Prays that she gets it right. Realize that her voice has made the only darkness in a sea full of white. She prays that telling her own story will be stronger and more powerful than the men who try to do it for her or to her. You see, everyone wants a piece of Black woman, but Black woman can't even speak her own piece. Black woman tries to seek peace between the mic and the crowd in what feels like light years of space, and light travels faster than sound, so Black woman knows that they will see her before they ever truly hear her. Black woman steps up to mic, cognizant of how she appears in front of a jury who don't see her as their peer. Texas Grand Slam got her feeling like a lone star. Black woman doesn't want to appear too woman, too Black. Black woman is told never to hurt, that she don't feel a thing, that her melanin and estrogen cancel out the human in her DNA. Black woman is told that her sorrow is a false alarm that goes off way too often, while white privilege gets the siren it struggles all over the stage. Black woman steps up to mic, feels the urge to push but doesn't want to tear, doesn't want them to interpret weakness from her tears. She doesn't want to be called a crybaby, so she rocks her poem gently in the back of her throat and whispers to it, "Don't cry, baby." Instead, yell. Wail like you want nothing more than to be born and to live. You press your chin down into your chest and you push like you deserve to be here. You push like you a virgin. You push like you trying to deliver a savior into this world. Black woman steps up to mic. Black woman speaks.
So we just want to take a moment and get to the slide where we share some resources with you and some references before we open to Mr. Powell sharing with us questions or opening the floor for Q&A. So these are just some of the references that we wanted to bring to your attention, that you can utilize to help you in trying to live a more congruent and authentic life. So the book from Dr. Brene Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection, book from Bell Hooks, All About Love, New Revisions. North Carolina Task Force for Racial Equity and Criminal Justice, their final report has a lot of good information as well. Social health determinants for health inequalities is also something that's important for us to pay attention to that can impact the psychological and emotional issues that we see oftentimes Black women experience. And then Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes' book on Too Heavy a Yoke, Black Women and the Burden of Strength. And then on the next slide, we just have some resources, mental health resources that people can look up. There's a Black Line, there's Therapy for Black Girls, there's the Loveland Therapy Fund, and that is an organization that you can reach out to and request some assistance in paying for therapy. If you're a Black woman or Black girl, they will help pay for at least 4 sessions, I believe, for your therapy session. So if you or someone you know would benefit from that, please let them know. And then if you're residing in the South Carolina or Connecticut area in which I am licensed, please feel free to reach out to VirginiaHealingServices.org. Thank you once again for allowing us to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the information that you were able to provide to us, Dr. Raisin and Ms. Hill. You know, the two of you together presented a very dynamic duo. I just wanted to open it up to questions and answers from the audience, or to questions from the audience, and hopefully some answers from the panel. I'll give folks a chance to kind of orient themselves and to, to come up to speed and to present whatever question you might have. I'll kick it off with this question that's geared mainly towards the second part of the presentation. How do you pass down positive mental health behaviors to future generations? Dr. Vidrine, how would you, I know you just posted some materials, some resources, for young Black girls, but how do you pass down, methodologies for positive mental health behaviors to younger generations?
I think it's essential for us. I think that's a great question. And I think it's essential for us as people to first and foremost, do our best to honor what it is that we're feeling by acknowledging it, right? So Davlin did a great job talking about ways in which we can live a congruent life, right? So in addition to making sure you have medical treatment, mental health treatment is important. So sharing that if you're going into therapy, letting that be known to your children that I'm going to therapy and this is, to help mommy. The other piece of it too, when we're talking about self-awareness, it starts with the little things. For instance, how many of us hold on to relieving ourselves when we need to go tinkle? Many of us do that and we think, oh, it's no big thing, not a big thing. Actually, if you do that long enough, you can reach out and have a UTI, which can lead, if unaddressed, because I'm so busy taking care of other people, if unaddressed can lead to an infection. So it really starts with us taking the time to feel what we feel, honor ourselves by acknowledging that and doing the little things. It'll wait. The meeting can wait. I can let them know I'm going to be a little late because I need to go to the restroom. Take the time to honor yourself and feel what you're feeling. So that's one. The other piece is when you are getting therapy, it shouldn't be an issue of shame, right? I shouldn't feel shameful because I have to take insulin because I have diabetes. Same thing with therapy, right? Let people know, people that your children know that this is what mommy's doing to take care of herself or what daddy's doing to take care of himself so that I can also be better available for you. So that would be one way. Davlin, did you want to add on to that?
I would just agree, modeling positive emotional health is a good way because it's more about, a lot of times we'll say this is what you need to do, then do something different. So that's why we talked about congruence. It's like, if I tell you, oh, you don't need to hit something when you get angry, but then I slam something on the table and hit something when I'm angry, that's what is going to be passed down. But when I'm angry, if I say I'm really angry, I need to take some time to breathe, I take some deep breaths, then I've modeled what I do when I get angry, and your family is more likely to kind of follow along with that kind of modeling.
Thank you. We have here a comment or more of a question. Someone asked, could we please post the names of those 4 resources for therapy? I'll commit to posting, all the resources that we've mentioned here today. And I'll also send to you a reading list, that would kind of give you an opportunity to develop your own understanding of these issues, particularly some of the ones that Dr. Harris mentioned during her portion of the presentation. Another question would be, this is for Dr. Harris. What authors or books would you recommend that portray Black women differently or in a wider spectrum than the strong Black woman image?
Well, I saw that and I was thinking specifically about works by Alice Childress. Although this is an adolescent girl, she has a novel called Rainbow Jordan that I think is a good example of that. I would recommend Paul Marshall, Brown Girl, Brown Stones. Although even as I'm giving these titles, it's still hard to see them completely without strength, but those are some alternative things. A couple that come to mind. Let's see if Alice Walker has anything in there that might be good. Alice Walker has a wide spectrum of characters in female characters in a novel like The Color Purple. There's Sugar Avery, who does everything she wants to do, but there's also Celie, who's withdrawn and sort of put upon and beaten up. So you have that kind of thing as happening as well. And I'll keep thinking. If something else occurs to me, I'll mention it. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. This is a question, a very good question that I think either of you would be equipped to handle. It says, when I think of strong Black women, I immediately think of loneliness. Being a Black woman can be very lonely. Lonely, not alone, but lonely in so many aspects of life. I was just wondering what your thoughts are about this statement and feeling about loneliness. What would you say, Dr. Harris? Is there anything that
Well,
jumps?
I can see the point that you have aloneness in the midst of community, because there's a collectivity around these women usually over whom they're presiding, at least the ones that I'm talking about in the literature. You know, Mama Lena has a family, she has all of those folks, but the question is very well taken because there is aloneness there. When you make all the decisions, when you isolate yourself from everybody in terms of decision-making, when you don't, as the second part of the discussion pointed out, when you don't adhere to self-care, when you don't do congruent living, there is this kind of isolation or loneliness. And this, I think, goes back to Dr. Vidrine's point that you have to be willing to admit, I'm on this island of strength, but I have no support and I need to get some. I need to find a way to admit that I'm not only admit that I'm alone and lonely, but also to recognize that I need some assistance.
Would either of you like to contribute to that response? I think that Dr. Harris, hit the nail on the head in terms of the collectivity aspect of it and the community aspect of it. You're part of a community, but you can still also feel very alone. Would either of you add anything to that response?
I would say the willingness to sit with the loneliness. There's an escapism that comes with life in general, I think, with all the people. It's like, however I can escape this feeling, that's what I want to do. Instead, really focusing in and asking yourself in the time, what is it I need? I really feel lonely right now, but what is it I'm needing? Because sometimes things can mask and we have a hard time isolating what we're actually feeling. It's like, do I need nourishment? Do I need comfort? Do I need warmth? What is it I actually need? And then building relationships so that sometimes you can go outside of yourself to meet that. And then sometimes you can meet those needs within yourself. It's just, we don't learn how to do that typically. And so that's a journey in and of itself.
Well, here's a very good question that brings to bear the relationship between the Black man and the Black woman. This reeks of a question that Dr. Harris would be equipped to answer, but I'd certainly open it to the entire panel. Yeah, I mean, the question is, how is the strength of the Black woman impacted by the Black man and his ability to step up, in quotation marks, in his role and independence in the Black family / community? It's like one of the topics from one of your courses that examined, the notion of Black masculinity, the relationship between the Black man and the Black woman. And I think that when you spoke earlier about some of those defining characteristics, one of them was to be in control, right? In control.
Exactly.
So yes, what would you say to that?
Well, to be in control and you have to keep in mind that a lot of the literary texts that I'm using have absent or absolutely diminished Black male characters. And that's why I think it's really interesting in Hansberry's Raisin the Sun that the father is conveniently dead so that mama dominates. And, when I think, I was thinking of a novel by Pearl Cleage where there is a wonderful relationship between a man and a woman. And the title of it is What Looks Like Crazy on an Ordinary Day. And so that would be another one of the texts I would recommend for a more expansive view. What looks like crazy on an ordinary day. And these two people are able to form a union that a lot of the others are not. I mean, when you think about Setha and Toni Morrison's Beloved, it is only at the very, very end of that text that she realizes she doesn't have to be strong. She can forge a relationship with Paul D. So men are in a really compromised position in terms of the literature for most of the literary portraits. And I'll let the other folks comment on real life examples of this.
Yeah, it looks like Dr. Vidrine may be willing to jump in there. Is there anything you would like to add?
Well, So the things that I can add to or speak to is really more anecdotal. So I try not to delve in too much into that because that is not an area that I really specialize in. Aside from speaking to, like I said, my own experience as a clinician working with families, and that's very small. So I can't really speak on the collective of what it would be the impact like for Black men. So I do limit speaking to that at this time.
Sure. Well, here's one question that I think is a general question, and it's to the entire panel. It's about the notion of Black girl magic. What do you think the narrative of Black girl magic fits into? I'm sorry. How do you think the narrative of Black girl magic fits into the traditional representation of a strong Black woman? Does it highlight the positive aspects of being a strong Black woman, or does it continue to perpetuate the stereotype that Black women are magical and strong and don't need help? It sounds to me like they're taking Black girl magic literally, which I think Dr. Harris did a bit in some of the readings that you talked about, looking at strength from the supernatural kind of standpoint, and to focus in on what Dr. Vidrine and what Ms. Hill mentioned, just magic in general and having the ability to have control, over your own destiny. So would either of you like to comment on that? What does Black girl magic mean to either of you? When I think of Black girl magic, I think that it's very much a contemporary kind of thing. You hear Black girl magic, you hear Black boy joy, and it highlights, the fact that we appreciate our melanin, that we're happy in our own skin, that there is something unique about being Black and the Black experience that equips us, with special powers that we need to go through life. So I think that there definitely is a connection between that saying and the traditional representations of strong Black women. I have a question about generational. Here we go. I'm sorry, Ms. Hill, Davlin, you would like to speak to that question. Is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's just the next iteration. I think something evolves, like from Mammy to the strong Black woman to the angry Black woman. So now it's like to Black woman magic. I think it's just the next iteration because I think the society at large finds it hard to see Black women as complex individuals with nuance. And so how can we figure out the Black woman? It must be this. And so I think that it's just learning, because we have to get like a PhD in whiteness to be able to survive in the culture. We just do. You have to learn all the things. Whereas most people don't have to come into Black culture and learn all the things in order to survive. And so I think that's a little bit of what makes a difference, just from my point of view.
One of your slides that the two of you had in the latter portion of the presentation talked about the strong Black women as a counter narrative to, other portrayals of the Jezebel, the Mammy figure. And I think that dovetails quite nicely, throughout both presentations, that you do see this narrative and then this counter narrative. So my question is, whose narrative is it? Who are we listening to? Are we listening to, to writers? Are we listening to, to art, to media? Who are we listening to nowadays when you think about the notion of the strong Black woman? What kind of messages are out there? As I kind of just talked through this and asked the question, now you have folks like Cardi B, you have Megan Thee Stallion, folks who, well, Dr. Harris, I see you're covering your eyes, but to some folks, the power and the control that they have over their own bodies is a sign of a strong Black woman. So, what was that about, Dr. Harris?
I don't know. As Ms. Hill saying that, there's a progression, always there's a progression. And whatever I think Black women do, whether it's Black Girls Magic or whether it's performers, there's a paradox there. Anytime you try to claim, this is my space, this is who I am, you run the risk of somebody stereotyping you in some way, right? And so that gets to be very difficult. One of the reasons Toni Morrison said that she wrote The Bluest Eye and published The Bluest Eye in 1970 was that there was no image of Black femaleness in the literature that reflected her. And she then wrote the type of book that she wanted to read. Now, when you talk about who we listening to, for the literature that I talk about, for the longest time, we're listening to the dominant white society. And that's one thing, what all those unspoken taboos that I talked about. You can't present a Black woman who's not a good Christian. You can't present a Black woman who's a nice a lesbian until Anne Allen Shockley said, forget it, in 1974, and did Loving Her. You know, and I think that the kind of, what should I say, daringness that figures like Megan Thee Stallion present reflect that kind of, I don't care what you folks are saying, I will write myself as I want to write myself. I will present myself as I want to present myself.
So control over her own narrative, right?
Yeah.
So hey, here's a question. What advice would you give to Black clinicians? This is geared towards the clinicians on the panel. What advice would you give to Black clinicians who work with Black women on how to collectively heal from racial trauma, especially when we continue to witness public Black death? That's a heavy one, but that is one that certainly is, you know, rooted in the discussion that we're talking about today. Would either the clinicians on the panel like to tackle this question of how you can give, or, you know, what advice you would give to other Black clinicians about working with Black women?
Yes. So I think that's a great question. And I think it's important for us to have a clarity about what racial trauma is. So racial trauma results out of experiencing and witnessing racial stressors, and including racism and discrimination and violence against Black people or people of color on a regular basis. And so I think one thing that's important is being able to recognize that this is what it is, right? So it's not a figment of my imagination what I'm feeling. So that's one piece. The other piece is recognizing the effects of racial trauma. So some of the effects is the re-experiencing of distressing events, chronic stress, hypervigilance, depression, anxiety, physical pain, you know, hypertension, respiratory complications. These are all effects of racial trauma. So in order for us to be able to address it, we need to name it, know what it is. Then we need to have protect ourselves through a process. And so one thing that we have to do is be aware of what our triggers are, right, to these racial traumas. You need to know what your triggers are. And you need to know, be able to set and practice healthy boundaries, okay? That's important. It's important for us to talk to like-minded friends that we can be vulnerable with, like-minded friends that we find trustworthy, that will hear what it is that we're saying so that we can seek support from them. So the other piece of this is also practicing self-care. And so sometimes that means utilizing our cognitive skills, like, you know, to engage in prayer, to engage in meditation, to engage in, you know, music, creativity. Black people, you know, we've seen how creative we can be. Utilize that to help us in trying to fight and heal from these racialized trauma. Engage in pleasurable activities. Oftentimes we don't do that enough, you know, legal, pleasurable activities, set healthy boundaries for yourselves, and exercise, deep breathing, you know, honoring yourself. These are all ways in which we can help ourselves to better cope with racialized trauma. And then also I want to say with Black people, oftentimes we feel the need sometimes to over-explain to people who are not Black what our experience is. Be very careful with that. Do you have the energy to do that? We don't have to engage in the heavy lifting of making it clear to you what it is that I'm experiencing. It's nice if you understand, but if you're going to fight me tooth and nail, I don't have to exert energy into doing that. There's Google for that. You can watch the news outlets and all that. Speaking about news outlets, you can also deplug from the news. Be very mindful of how much time you spend exposing yourself to these type of things. Those are potential triggers. So that would be how I would address helping people to deal with racialized trauma.
You mentioned, you know, kind of another reiteration of the grounding exercise that that Ms. Hill kind of, you know, kicked off your presentation with. That's really interesting to me. You know, as we wind down, are you able to give us, you know, some tips on how to ground yourself? If you know, when you wake up in the morning, I hear about, you know, words of affirmation, other ways that you can ground yourself. Ms. Hill, would you have some recommendations on how we could use the breathing techniques that you mentioned, and, you know, just a little crash course for those of us who want to get in the habit of grounding ourselves in that way?
Yeah, so I think there's chronic scarcity, kind of as a culture, the not having enough resources, not enough time, not enough relationships, and so scarcity kind of makes because being safe is the most important thing. So our stress response system kicks in, and so we either are in a fight, flight, or freeze most of the time. And so to calm that down, breathing is probably one of the best things you can do. Because you don't have time to breathe if you're running for your life, right? You don't have time. So to breathe, you're telling your body, hey, we're safe. You're telling your mind, hey, we're safe, because we have time this morning to breathe. So I would suggest taking 10 long breaths as soon as you wake up in the morning. And those breaths should be your exhale longer than your inhale, so that you have time to kind of calm your brain, your life down. So I would place my feet flat on the floor, I would uncross everything, and just sit up as tall as I could without straining, and then take those deep breaths, and then count as you do them, so you can keep bringing your mind back. You're like, what number am I on? So you're like, oh, I'm on 9, and then just keep counting as you go back from 10 to 1. That would be one thing I would do. And then during the day, various times, take a break from the computer or from work. They say every couple of hours you should spend 10 minutes just doing something else. And I suggest you spend that time doing what you need to do to ground yourself and be present. And that you can do that with music as well. Music is a good thing because lots of people focus on the words, you hear the sound, you participate as well. And that's kind of like a mantra meditation, because you're doing that and really engaging in it.
Well, we're winding down. I would like to give, each of you kind of a last word. If there's anything you wanted to say, 30 seconds or so. And in the meanwhile, there's a question here that someone asked about whether we had any suggestions for upcoming events that centered around children and mental health. I understand that next month is Pediatric Mental Health Month. As I sit here, I don't have anything that immediately comes to mind, but we have a very robust pediatrics practice here at Philadelphia Fight that's run by our Dr. Mario Cruz. So I'll run that by Dr. Mario Cruz, and we'll add that to the list of items that we'll put on the website once this seminar is over. We'll include that in addition to the readings that Dr. Harris mentioned, and anything that Dr. Vidrine or Ms. Hill wants to make available to folks after the seminar, so that they can continue, to explore this issue and to continue to try to bring their best selves to everything that they do. So with 30 seconds, I'll go from my right to my left, and I have Dr. Harris here. Is there anything that you wanted to say to have the last word?
I just wanted to thank my fellow panelists for their wonderful presentations. It was great. Thank you so much. Especially Dr. Vidrine for those last comments about recognizing stressors and how to deal with things, the advice you gave to the clinicians. Anything I think that we can do to avoid despair, and the creativity and the upbeatness that Dr. Vidrine was talking about, that just really struck home with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Dr. Vidrine, you got 30 seconds there. You mentioned that you are in private practice and that you're licensed in several states. Do you want to give us any more information about that, where folks can maybe reach out to you in the event that they need to?
If you want to reach out, please feel free to do so at vidrineshealingservices.org. I do want to
I'm sorry. Say it one more time.
vidrineshealingservices.org. Yes. And I just want to thank Philadelphia Fight. I want to thank Dr. Harris, of course, my colleague, Davlin Hill. I do want to thank everyone for being here. I think what I'd like people to get is to recognize that we as Black women are not a monolith. We should be allowed. In order for us to be allowed, we have to take initiative to honor ourselves and feel what we feel. Right? And we come in all shapes and sizes. And I mean that literally, in the way in which we think, our mindsets and stuff. The other thing that I think is important is for you to be very clear about what are your core values, because that's what we want your boundaries to be set on. If you know what your core values are you operating from that? Or are your core values specific to white supremacy? So you need to know, what are the characteristics of white supremacy? And once you understand that, then you can do the assessment as to, are my core values in alignment with white supremacy? That tells us that I need to be perfect. That tells me that there's only one way to get it done. It has to be right and all this other stuff. So that's what I would ask us to do. Be clear about what your core values are and what's impacting that, what's influencing that. and be in alignment with opulence, be in alignment with abundance, and not in alignment with the struggle. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Regina, for interrupting you, but I wanted to make sure that that your website got across to the audience so that they could link up with you in the event that they would like to. And Ms. Hill, what would you say in the final 30 seconds or so that we have here?
I would agree with making space to create the life that we want. I think a lot of the time responsibility drives the conversation. I'm going to be responsible and take care of all these things. And so our life can look one-dimensional. And so what does it look like to build that life, including the creativity, including taking care of others, including taking care of ourselves? Because it takes work to build that life. And it's not just going to fall into our laps. And so how can we be more intentional about building the strong Black woman that is inclusive? Because strength includes vulnerability, and strength includes being able to take conflict and work through it. Like all of those things include strength. And so more expansive lives is what I would say. How can I live a more expansive life?
Thank you so much for that. And again, I wanted to thank all of our panelists for coming and for showing up for us today. We really appreciate it. We're excited about the information that you were able to provide to us. And most importantly, there seemed like that is something that folks want to learn more about. So this was the second installment of Philadelphia Fight's first annual virtual health equity speaker series. If you're interested in these topics and if you want to join us next week, we'll be focusing on fighting discrimination involving people who are living with HIV, and also creating a safe space for folks who are experiencing problems with the opioid epidemic. So combating discrimination against HIV discrimination, and also against discrimination with folks who are in medically assisted therapies for drug use disorder. That is sure to be an exciting topic. It's going to be led by Jacqueline Romero, a U.S. attorney, and it's going to be in partnership with the Philadelphia LGBT Bar Association. So with that, we invite you back to join us, and thank you all again for coming. Thank you so much.